Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a part of Irish history that might make you rethink some things, the Magdalene Laundries.
Yeah, these institutions run by Catholic orders, they were supposed to be for fallen women,
Right,
but
right.
in reality, they were much darker.
Way darker.
They were basically prisons for women and girls, often unwed mothers. And get this, they were operating all the way into the 1990s.
It's crazy, right? To really dig into this, we're going to be looking at the film Small Things Like These. It's based on Claire Keegan's novel.
Great book.
Yeah, and the film follows Bill Furlong, played by Cillian Murphy, a coal merchant in a small Irish town in the 1980s, and he kind of stumbles upon the truth about these laundries.
One of the things I find so interesting about the film is the setting, 1980s Ireland, the small town where the
Right.
Catholic Church had so much influence.
Yeah, for sure.
And they do such a great job of contrasting that warm, festive Christmas atmosphere with the dark reality of the laundries.
Oh, absolutely. The contrast is really striking.
Yeah.
And the way they use those church bells throughout the film,
Oh, yeah.
they start off as this familiar, almost comforting sound.
Mm-hmm.
But as Bill uncovers more about the laundries, they become almost ominous, like a warning.
Exactly. Like a constant reminder of the church's presence, kind of watching over everything.
Right. And speaking of unsettling, the film doesn't hold back on showing how these laundries actually operated.
It's tough to watch, for sure.
Yeah, we see forced labor, exploitation, mothers separated from their children. It's heartbreaking. And they were profiting from it all, arranging adoptions for money.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that was going on, and some girls were sent there just because people thought they were being flirtatious. Can you imagine?
It's mind-boggling. It really makes you think about the control the church had over women's lives back then.
Totally. And the irony of the names of these orders, Sisters of Mercy, Sisters of Our Lady of Charity of the Refuge, just adds another layer to it all, doesn't it?
Almost Orwellian. But what I found really interesting is Bill's journey. He's not a hero. He's just an average guy.
Right, and every man,
Exactly. And he just starts noticing things that don't quite add up.
like little clues.
Yeah, like he sees a boy shivering outside the convent
Oh, right.
and a woman trying to get away from a drunk man.
Mm.
These little things start to make him question what's really going on.
And he becomes our way into this world, we see things through his eyes.
Exactly. And then there's that scene where he sees a girl being dragged into the convent, screaming.
Oh, that's hard to watch.
In the book, they say it's like it sliced him open. And even though Bill doesn't talk much, the film uses close-ups and shots from behind to show how deeply this affects him.
The filmmaking is so powerful.
Yeah, you really feel like you're right there with him. And the sound design, too. Those moments of silence, just Bill's breathing.
It just adds to the tension, doesn't it?
Wholly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he finds that young woman locked in the coal shed.
Oh, wow.
And that's the turning point, isn't it? He can't ignore what's happening anymore.
It's a gut punch, that scene. And did you know that the actress who plays that girl, Eileen Walsh, she was also in another film about the Magdalene Laundries, the Magdalene sisters?
No way. Really?
Yeah. It's like she's carrying the weight of those experiences with her.
Wow, that's heavy. And then there's that really intense scene between Bill and Sister Mary, the head of the convent.
Oh, yeah.
All those veiled threats and the power dynamics.
It's scary.
You can really sense the danger Bill is in just for asking questions
Mm.
and knowing that speaking out could endanger his own daughters.
It adds a whole other layer to his dilemma.
For sure. It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about keeping his family safe, too.
Yeah.
To understand Bill's motivation a bit better, we should probably talk about his background.
Yeah, good point. He was an illegitimate child himself, and his mom was in a tough spot, and they were taken in by a woman named Mrs. Wilson.
So the situation at the convent really hits home for him.
Absolutely. It's not just some abstract injustice. It's personal.
To understand how powerful the church was in Ireland back then, I came across this quote from John McGahern's memoir. He says, by 1950, the state had become a theocracy in all but name.
Wow.
The church controlled almost all of education, the hospitals, the orphanages, the juvenile prison systems, the parish halls. Church and state worked hand in hand.
That's chilling.
It really gives you a sense of how much control the church had. No wonder Bill feels so trapped. But this quote only scratches the surface, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the specific policies or events that led to this theocracy?
That's a good question. And how did it impact the daily lives of women, especially those who were deemed fallen?
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating how the film uses Bill's deliveries to the convent to kind of peel back these layers of history.
Right, like he's literally bringing light into these dark places.
Yeah, both physically and metaphorically.
And as he uncovers more, He realizes that staying silent makes him complicit in the system.
He can't just say, it's none of our business anymore.
Right, it becomes everyone's business.
That's a powerful realization, isn't it?
It's the moment he decides he can't just stand by and watch.
Yeah.
He has to do something, even if it's just a small act of defiance.
And that's what makes this story so powerful, right?
Yeah, it's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak up against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable or even risky.
Absolutely. Because as we see in small things like these, even small acts of courage can make a difference. They can start to break down those systems of oppression, little by little.
Which brings us back to those church bells.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes. Those bells, once a symbol of comfort and tradition.
Now they take on a whole new meaning,
Almost like a warning.
a reminder of the church's power and its watchful eye.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. Those bells, they really stick with you, don't they?
They do. At first, they just blend in with that cozy Christmas feeling.
Right, exactly.
But then, as Joel starts to see what's really going on,
yeah,
they become something totally different.
right.
Like a constant reminder that the church is always there, always watching.
That's such a good point, and it really gets at that whole theme of surveillance and control that runs through the film. And it's just the physical walls of the laundry,
Right.
but those invisible walls too, like the pressure to conform, the fear of speaking out.
Yeah, that fear is everywhere, isn't it? It's like the whole town has this unspoken agreement to just look the other way. Even Dill says at one point, it's none of our business. But of course, the film is trying to tell us that it is our business.
It is.
We can't just ignore injustice, even if it's easier to look away.
And that's the heart of Bill's struggle, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to figure out how to be a good person, a good Catholic, when he's surrounded by this awful truth.
And the film doesn't make it easy for him or for us, the viewers.
No, it doesn't. It makes us ask ourselves those hard questions, like, what would I do in that situation?
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to judge Bill for not speaking up right away. But would we be any braver? Especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone else.
It's a good question. And it's important to remember that it wasn't just the church involved in all of this.
Right.
The Irish government was complicit too. They knew what was going on in those laundries, but they basically looked the other way. They even gave them money.
So it wasn't just inaction, it was active support.
Exactly. It was a whole system designed to keep these women silent and hidden.
It's terrifying, really, the scale of it.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how power structures, especially when religion is involved, can be so insidious.
You're right. And that brings us back to the film's use of symbolism. The church bells, those dark hallways in the convent, the constant rain. It all creates this feeling of being trapped, suffocated.
It really does. And even though we don't see much of what happened to the women inside the laundries, we feel their presence.
We do. It's like the film gives them a voice even in their absence.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the film so effective. It doesn't need to be graphic or over the top.
Yeah.
Just seeing Bill's struggle is enough.
Absolutely. It's all about those small, quiet moments. The way Cillian Murphy, he just embodies that internal conflict Bill is going through.
He's amazing in this film.
He is. You can see the fear, the guilt, the growing sense of responsibility all in his eyes.
And the director, Tim Mielance, he creates this world that's both beautiful and unsettling. You have those picturesque Irish landscapes, but then you have this darkness underneath it all.
It's like a visual metaphor for the whole story.
Right.
Things aren't always what they seem.
And that's something we have to remember as viewers too, right?
Absolutely.
We can't just take things at face value.
Yeah.
We need to question, to look deeper, to challenge our own assumptions.
Small things like these really encourages us to do that, doesn't it?
It does. It's saying, don't be afraid to speak up, even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it disrupts the status quo.
Because sometimes those small acts of defiance can lead to real change.
Like when Bill leaves that little gift for the girl in the coal shed.
Oh, yeah.
It's a tiny gesture.
But it means so much.
It's like a crack in the wall of silence and indifference. And as we know from the real-life story of the Magdalene Laundries sometimes, a crack is all it takes.
Right. It took a long time.
It did. But eventually, those cracks became too big to ignore. People started speaking out, demanding justice for the survivors.
And it's important to remember that the fight isn't over.
No, it's not.
Many survivors are still waiting for recognition, for compensation for what they went through.
And their stories remind us that this isn't just something that happened in the past. It's a legacy that continues to affect people today.
So what can we do? How can we make sure these kinds of things never happen again?
Well, the film shows us that it starts with individual action. We can't just wait for governments or institutions to do the right thing. We have to be willing to step up ourselves, amplify the voices of those who have been silenced, demand accountability from those in power.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected and our choices matter.
Bill's story shows us that even ordinary people can make extraordinary choices. Choices that can have a ripple effect and change the world.
And those choices don't have to be huge, right?
No, they don't.
Sometimes it's those small acts of kindness, of courage, of speaking truth to power that can really make a difference.
Like that moment in the film when Bill, even though he knows it's dangerous, decides to. Like that moment in the film when Bill, even though he knows it's dangerous, decides to help one of the young women escape the laundry. It's a really tense scene.
Oh, it is. Your heart is just pounding, waiting to see what happens.
And it's such a turning point for Bill, isn't it?
Totally. He goes from just observing to actually taking action.
Right. He's not just feeling bad for these women anymore. He's putting himself on the line to help them.
And it's a huge risk. He knows he could lose everything, his business, his family.
But he does it anyway, because he can't live with himself knowing what's going on and doing nothing.
It's like he finally realizes that empathy isn't enough.
Right. You have to act on it. You have to be willing to fight for what's right, even if it means putting yourself in danger.
And the film makes it clear that it's not always easy to do the right thing, especially when you're up against such a powerful institution.
But it's so important to try, to have that moral courage, to speak out against injustice, even when it's hard.
Even when it feels like you're all alone.
Because you're not. There are always others who feel the same way. And even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
They can inspire others to find their voice, too. It's like that saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
And for so long, people did nothing about the Magdalene Laundries.
They turned a blind eye to the suffering of these women.
But eventually the truth came out, thanks to the survivors who were brave enough to speak up, and the activists and filmmakers who helped amplify their voices.
And we have to remember, this isn't ancient history. The last Magdalene Laundry closed less than 30 years ago.
That's right. There are people alive today who lived through those horrors, and their stories deserve to be heard and acknowledged.
Absolutely. And the fight for justice for these survivors is still ongoing. Many are still seeking compensation, recognition for what they endured.
So, small things like these. It's not just a story about the past, is it?
No, it's not. It's a story about an ongoing struggle for justice and human dignity.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in that struggle.
We can't just sit back and assume that everything's okay now. We have to stay vigilant. We have to keep speaking out against injustice wherever we see it.
We have to be willing to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves.
Because silence is complicity.
Right. And small things like these, it does such a powerful job of showing us the consequences of silence.
It's not a comfortable film to watch, but it's an important one.
It stays with you, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you think about your own values, your own choices, and it inspires you to be better, to do better.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What small things can you do to make the world a more just and compassionate place?
It's a question worth asking ourselves every day, isn't it?
It is. Because even the smallest acts of kindness and courage can have a ripple effect. They can change lives, and they can change the world. Thanks for joining us.